Chapter 1. The Bargain. The rain had not stopped for 3 days. It fell in sheets upon the cobblestones of Mayfair, turning the city into a grey watercolour of glistening roofs and dim gaslight. The carriages that passed splashed mud onto beggars and flower sellers alike, leaving the poor to vanish into the wet dusk like smudged silhouettes. London was at its most merciless when it rained, and that was precisely why Lord Alaric Hawthorne chose this night to do something he had sworn he would never do again. He needed to buy someone's silence. The scandal that had haunted his family for nearly a year, the death of his fiancée, Lady Eveline, had resurfaced in whispers. The coroner had ruled it a fall from the cliffs near Dover, but gossip, as always, was a living thing. It breathed through parlours and tea-rooms, coiling around his name like smoke. And now someone had begun sending letters, unsigned but sharp with implication, letters that spoke of things only a witness could know. So Lord Hawthorne, once a man of spotless honour and unbending pride, found himself standing beneath the dripping awning of a bookshop on Drury Lane, watching a woman across the street. She was not what he had expected. She wore a plain dress, hem damp with rain, and carried herself with the quiet defiance of someone who had long ago stopped caring who watched her. Her name, he'd been told, was Clara Whitmore. She worked as a seamstress, renting a single room above a bakery, and she had seen something the night of Eveline's death, enough to destroy him if she chose to speak. The note she had sent him was brief. "I know what you did. Meet me where the truth began." That was why he was here, waiting. When she finally crossed the street toward him, the flickering gaslight caught the pale strands of her hair escaping from her hood, and her eyes, grey as the rain, found his with unsettling calm. "You came?" she said. No curtsy, no pretense of awe at the titled man before her, only a statement, soft but sharp. "I had little choice," he replied. "You made your intention quite clear." Her lips twitched. "And yet you're the one who seems afraid." "I'm not afraid," Alaric said, though his pulse betrayed him. "Only cautious. There are better ways to earn money than through blackmail." "Is that what you think this is?" she asked. "You believe I sent for you to bargain, didn't you?" he countered. "You've made yourself a danger to me, Miss Whitmore. Whatever you think you saw, you can be compensated for your discretion." "Compensated?" she repeated, as though tasting the word. "With gold?" "Yes, enough to buy you a different life, a better one." There was a pause, not long, but enough to let the rain's rhythm fill the silence between them. Then she smiled faintly and said, "Tell me, my lord, is that how you buy off your guilt too?" Something cold and electric passed through him. She was bolder than he'd anticipated. Her gaze did not waver, even as he stepped closer, his coat brushing her sleeve. "You speak as if you know me," he said. "You do not." "Perhaps not," she said, "but I saw you that night, Lord Hawthorne. I saw the way you stood over her. I saw the sea take her. You didn't push her, but you didn't stop her either." He drew a breath, sharp as the crack of thunder above. The words hit him like a confession dragged from his own conscience. Because she was right. He hadn't pushed Eveline, but he had let her go. "You know nothing of what happened," he said, his voice low, measured. "You have no idea what she did to me. what she was capable of. "Then tell me," Clara said simply. Her tone wasn't mocking now. It was quiet, curious, even compassionate. It was the first time anyone had asked without judgment, the first time someone had wanted to hear rather than condemn. Alaric looked away, jaw tightening. "There's nothing to tell. She was ill, unstable." "Then why the letters?" she pressed. "Why the fear in your eyes now?" He said nothing. The street lamps flickered. Somewhere in the distance, a carriage wheel screeched on wet stone. When he finally spoke again, his voice was softer, almost weary. "What do you want, Miss Whitmore?" For the first time, she hesitated. Her eyes dropped to the gold ring he wore, the one that had belonged to Eveline, the one the newspapers had called the cursed engagement. She drew a slow breath. "I want the truth," she said, "and a promise that you'll give it to the world when you're ready." He almost laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Truth? My dear, truth is far more dangerous than silence." "Perhaps," she said, "but silence can destroy a soul just the same." For a long moment, neither moved. Rain poured between them like a veil. Then Alaric reached into his coat and drew out a sealed envelope, thick, heavy, unmistakably full of gold sovereigns. "Take it," he said quietly, "for your silence." Clara looked at it, then at him. Her fingers brushed the envelope, but she did not take it. Instead, she stepped back, eyes narrowing with a strange, unreadable expression. "I'll take it," she said at last, "but not for silence. You'll see." And before he could speak again, she turned and walked away into the rain, vanishing into the grey like a ghost. Alaric stood there, the echo of her words lingering in the damp air. Something about her unsettled him, not just her defiance, but the strange pull in her voice. A woman like that didn't threaten for money. She wanted something else, something he didn't yet understand. And as he watched her disappear down the street, he knew with a cold certainty that his life had just changed. Not because of what she knew, but because of what she would make him feel. Chapter 2. A Lady in the Shadows. The carriage rattled along the gravel path that led through the gates of Hawthorne Hall, its wheels whispering against the autumn mist. From her seat beside a basket of mending cloth, Clara Whitmore pressed her fingers to the fogged glass and watched the estate come into view. It was vast, a sprawling Georgian manor set upon a rise of green, surrounded by dark woods and a lake that mirrored the sky like glass. Once the pride of its county, it now looked haunted by memory, the shutters drawn on the east wing, ivy climbing too far up the stone, and a stillness that felt less like peace and more like grief. The driver halted before the steps, and Clara gathered her shawl. The envelope of gold lay heavy in her pocket. Though she had not touched a single coin since that night, she had accepted his bargain, yes, but not as a bribe. It was to her a key, a means to enter the lion's den. Lord Alaric Hawthorne believed he had bought her silence. He did not yet know that she intended to discover what, exactly, he was so desperate to keep hidden. The butler who greeted her, a stooped man named Harris, led her through the echoing hallways without question. "Lord Hawthorne mentioned you would be coming," he said. "A seamstress, is it? We've a number of rooms in need of mending. His lordship dislikes discarding what can still be repaired." Clara's lips curved faintly, a sentiment I share. The air inside the manor smelled faintly of dust and wood smoke. Portraits lined the walls, Hawthornes of generations past, all bearing the same aristocratic melancholy, and above the grand staircase one painting hung shrouded in black cloth. The outline beneath it was unmistakably a woman's. "Lady Eveline, best not to stare," the butler murmured, following her gaze. "His lordship prefers the drapes remain. The mistress's portrait unsettles him." "I see," Clara said softly, as she was shown to her quarters, a small chamber adjoining the servants' hall. She couldn't help but notice the hush that seemed to grip the house. The maids spoke in whispers. The footman moved as if afraid to disturb something fragile. Even the ticking of the long case clock in the foyer sounded like a heartbeat too loud. By evening, Clara was at work in the old parlor, repairing a torn set of velvet curtains. The fire was low, the only light coming from a single candelabrum. Her needle flashed in and out of the fabric, precise and unhurried. She had learned early in life that patience was a kind of weapon, the only one women like her could afford. She was halfway through the seam when the door creaked open. "Miss Whitmore." She froze. Lord Hawthorne stood in the doorway, the same somber black coat as the night they met, his expression carefully neutral. But here, in his own house, something about him seemed different. More human, more tired. His hair was slightly disheveled, as if he had not slept well. "I didn't expect you to come," he said after a pause. "Not here." "You hired a seamstress," she replied evenly, eyes still on her work. "I applied. It seemed convenient." "Convenient," he repeated, stepping closer. "Or strategic?" Her hand stilled. Slowly, she lifted her gaze to meet his. "Perhaps both." He studied her face, searching for mockery, but found none. Only calm composure and that unnerving grey gaze that seemed to see more than he wished her to. "You're not afraid of me," he said quietly. "Should I be?" He almost smiled. "Most people are." "I'm not most people." A silence stretched between them, fragile, electric. The only sound was the soft hiss of the fire. Alaric crossed the room, each step measured. "You mean to test me, don't you?" he said. "To see whether I'll lose my composure, whether guilt will betray me." "I mean to understand you," she said, her tone low but steady, "and to decide for myself what kind of man you truly are." He let out a slow breath, as though he might have laughed if it weren't so tragic. "You're wasting your time, Miss Whitmore. Whatever I was, that man is gone." Clara's eyes softened, but her voice did not. "Then perhaps that's what you should fear most." He frowned. "And what do you mean by that? That you'll spend the rest of your life trying to silence ghosts that only want to be heard?" Her words lingered in the dim room like incense, fragrant, heavy, and inescapable. He turned away, as if to leave, but something made him stop. "How long do you intend to stay?" he asked. "As long as it takes," she said. "And if I told you to leave?" She threaded her needle with deliberate calm. "Then you would only confirm what I already suspect, that there's more to your guilt than what happened on those cliffs." He didn't answer. His jaw tightened. The rain began again outside, tapping against the windows like fingertips. When he finally left, she felt the air return to her lungs. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear but from the strange electricity that his presence carried. He was not the villain the city painted him to be. There was something buried under the arrogance, the pride, the self-imposed punishment, something broken and beautiful in equal measure. That night, as the house slept, Clara walked through the quiet halls with a candle in hand. She stopped before the draped portrait, her shadow flickering across the cloth. With a slow breath, she lifted the edge of the fabric. The woman beneath was breathtaking. dark curls, green eyes, a smile just shy of cruel, Lady Eveline, and there, painted faintly in the corner, was a golden locket shaped like a rose. Clara's heart quickened. The same locket she had seen once before in her mother's chest, years ago, before it was sold to a noble family in Dover. A connection, a secret she hadn't expected. Behind her, a floorboard creaked. Clara spun around. Lord Hawthorne stood at the end of the corridor, a candle of his own flickering in his hand. His expression was unreadable, part anger, part sorrow. "I told them not to uncover it," he said softly. "I couldn't sleep," Clara murmured. "I thought perhaps if I saw her, I might understand what happened." "Understand?" His voice darkened. "You think that painting holds truth? It holds nothing but lies. Lies I paid dearly to believe." He stepped closer until the light from both candles merged, casting their faces in a trembling glow. "You're playing a dangerous game, Miss Whitmore," he said, "and I don't yet know whether to admire you or despise you for it." Clara's pulse quickened, but her gaze did not waver. "Then perhaps, my lord, you'll have to get close enough to decide." For the briefest moment, the corners of his mouth softened, a flicker of something that might have been longing or regret. Then he turned away, leaving her with the portrait and the echo of his footsteps retreating down the hall. When the silence returned, Clara let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Whatever had begun between them, distrust, curiosity, or something far more dangerous, it was no longer something either of them could ignore. And far away, outside the rain-slicked windows of Hawthorne Hall, dawn began to break, pale, uncertain, and full of promise. Chapter 3. Whispers of the Past. The following days at Hawthorne Hall unfolded with a deceptive quiet. From dawn until dusk, the manor carried on in its muted rhythm. Fires tended, linens mended, silver polished until it gleamed like moonlight. Yet beneath that surface order, a current of tension hummed, subtle but constant, like the breath before a storm. Clara moved through it as though she had always belonged there. To the other servants, she was the new seamstress, quiet, diligent, unremarkable. But to Lord Hawthorne, she was a presence that refused to fade, a shadow that lingered in the corner of his thoughts, even when he tried to cast her out. He saw her everywhere now, in the library, repairing the velvet drapes, in the corridor, her skirts brushing the candlelight, in the garden, her hair coming loose in the wind. She spoke little, but when she did, her words seemed to carry more weight than silence itself. And yet, despite his better judgment, he began to listen for her footsteps. On the fourth morning, Clara was summoned to the music room, a place she had never entered before. The door creaked open to reveal a chamber washed in pale light, its walls lined with gilt mirrors and faded tapestries. At the center stood a grand piano, its lid closed, the ivory keys gathering dust. Lord Hawthorne stood beside it, his back to her, staring out the tall windows toward the misty lake beyond. "You play?" she asked softly. He turned, startled, not at her question, but at her tone. There was no mockery in it this time, only a strange, gentle curiosity. "I used to," he said, before Lady Eveline's death," she finished. His jaw tightened, but he did not rebuke her. Instead, he gestured to the piano. "She loved this room. She said music was the only language that never lied. I suppose that's why I stopped playing." Clara crossed the floor slowly. "Perhaps that's why you should start again." He gave a quiet, humorless laugh. "You think it would cleanse me, redeem me? I think, she said, that silence is its own kind of death. He looked at her then, really looked, and for a moment the walls he'd built around himself trembled. There was something in her gaze that unnerved him, not pity, not defiance, but understanding, the kind a person only earned through their own pain. You speak as though you've known grief, he said. She hesitated. I have. Tell me. Clara's eyes drifted toward the window. My mother was a seamstress too. She worked for the Montrose family in Dover. One winter, the Lord's son, a soldier just back from the Crimea, promised her marriage, but when she found herself with child, he vanished. She kept me anyway, even when it cost her her position. We lived on scraps and kindness, until one day there was no kindness left. Her voice didn't break, but the quiet in it was more powerful than tears. I was 12 when she died, she said. Pneumonia. I remember her last words. Don't let them silence you. I think she knew I'd need the reminder. Alaric's throat tightened. And you believe I'm one of them? I believe, she said carefully, that you're a man who's been silent too long. He turned away, unable to bear the way her eyes seemed to see through him. Later that afternoon, as the servants prepared for dinner, Clara found herself wandering into the west wing, the part of the manor most avoided. The air there was colder, the curtains drawn, the furniture covered in linen shrouds. She moved like a ghost among ghosts. A door stood slightly ajar at the end of the hall. Inside, the faint scent of lavender clung to the air. Eveline's chamber. Clara hesitated only a moment before entering. The room was untouched, a vanity with crystal perfume bottles, a silk gown draped over a chair, and a single candlestick half burned down beside a mirror. On the table lay a diary, small, bound in green leather. She should have turned away, but curiosity or fate guided her hand. The first pages were ordinary, filled with elegant handwriting and trivialities. Dinners, guests, complaints of boredom. But then, as the entries went on, the tone changed. Alaric grows distant. He avoids my eyes. He says I imagine things, but I've seen her. The girl from Dover, the one with the locket. She watches him when she thinks I do not. Clara's blood ran cold. The girl from Dover. Her mother had worked in Dover. The locket, the one in the portrait, was hers. Could it be? A voice broke her trance. You shouldn't be here. She turned, startled. Lord Hawthorne stood in the doorway, his expression dark as thunder. I was, she began, snooping, he finished, searching for evidence to damn me further. No! She closed the diary, holding it against her chest. I wanted to understand what truly happened to her. You said she was unstable, but this, she opened the book and read aloud, voice trembling. I fear he loves another, the seamstress from Dover. Who was she, Alaric? What did she mean? He looked stricken, pale as the ghosts that haunted his home. I don't know. She was ill, delusional. Clara stepped closer, her heart pounding. What if she wasn't? His eyes met hers, and for a moment, something raw and terrible passed between them. Then he turned sharply away. Leave this room, he said, his voice barely controlled. Now, tell me the truth, she whispered. Leave, he thundered, slamming his fist against the doorframe. She flinched, but did not move. Her defiance burned through her fear. You can hide from the truth, my lord, she said softly, but it will find you. It always does. Then she walked past him, her skirts brushing his coat, her scent, lavender and rain, lingering in the air. He stood there long after she was gone, the diary lying open on the floor, Eveline's words bleeding into the silence between them. That night he dreamed again of the cliffs, the wind, the waves, the scream that was not quite hers, and the look of relief that had crossed Eveline's face as she stepped backward into nothing. And in the dream, it wasn't her name he called as she fell. It was Clara's. He woke with a start, breath shallow, the sound of her voice echoing in his mind. He hated her for it, for making him feel alive again, for stirring the part of him that wanted to atone, not hide. But when morning came, and he found her in the rose garden with the diary beside her, he didn't send her away. Instead, he said quietly, "If you truly wish to understand Miss Whitmore, then come with me tomorrow. I'll show you where she died." Chapter 4. The Mask Cracks. The sea was violent that day. Winds tore through the cliffs of Dover, whipping salt into the air and sending the grey waves crashing against the rocks below. The sky hung low, heavy with the threat of rain, as if the heavens themselves could not decide whether to mourn or rage. Clara Whitmore stood on the edge of the path, her shawl clutched tightly around her shoulders, her eyes drawn to the place where the land simply ended. Here, this was where Lady Evelyn Hawthorne had fallen, and where, perhaps, Lord Hawthorne had lost whatever remained of his soul. Behind her, the sound of hooves faded as Alaric dismounted. His dark coat billowed in the wind as he approached, his face pale but determined. For a long moment neither spoke. The only sound was the sea's endless roar. "This is where it happened," he said finally, his voice low. "The newspapers claimed it was an accident, but they were wrong." Clara turned toward him. "Then tell me what truly happened." He hesitated, staring out at the horizon, as though the words might rise from the water if he waited long enough. When he finally spoke, his voice trembled, not with fear, but with memory. "She wasn't meant to die that day. We'd quarreled again. Eveline was mercurial, passionate, cruel when she wished to be. She accused me of betrayal, of deceit. I thought it was another of her tempers, but then she said she would end it. End us, and before I could stop her, she stepped back." "You didn't try?" Clara asked softly. "I reached for her," he said, almost pleading. "I did," but she smiled, that awful knowing smile, and said, "Now you'll be free, Alaric. Free to love her instead." The wind tore the last word from his lips. Clara's heart lurched. "Love who?" He turned toward her, eyes dark and haunted. "I don't know. There was no one. At least, I thought there wasn't, but now." His gaze lingered on her face, the curve of her jaw, the defiant calm in her eyes, and something flickered there, dangerous and unspoken. "Now you think she meant me," Clara said quietly. He didn't answer. He didn't have to. A long silence stretched between them, broken only by the waves crashing below. Then Clara stepped closer. "Lord Hawthorne, Alaric, if she meant me, if somehow our paths were bound even before we met, then tell me, what do you feel now?" He flinched as though struck. "You shouldn't ask that." "Why not?" "Because the answer would damn us both." Her eyes softened. "Perhaps it would free us instead." Something inside him broke then. The restraint, the bitterness, the years of silence. He reached out before he could stop himself, his hand trembling as it found her face. Her skin was cold from the sea air, her breath shallow. "You don't understand what you're doing," he whispered. "Yes," she breathed. "I do." The moment hung suspended, two souls caught between confession and catastrophe, until the storm broke above them, releasing sheets of rain. And then before reason could reclaim its hold, his lips found hers. The kiss was not gentle, it was desperate, the kind born of grief and hunger and years of unspoken need. The taste of salt and rain, of sorrow and desire mingled between them. When they finally broke apart, both were trembling. "This is wrong," he said hoarsely. "I brought you here to show you the truth, not to hide from it," she finished, "because that's all you've done since she died. You've hidden behind guilt, behind your title, behind gold." He stared at her, breathing hard. "You think you know me. I know what it is to live in silence," she said, voice fierce and trembling. "To let it choke you until you forget the sound of your own heart." Her hand lifted to his chest, where his heartbeat thundered beneath her palm. "But you're not dead, Alaric. You're still capable of this, of feeling. That's what terrifies you." He caught her wrist, his grip gentle but unyielding. "And what terrifies you, Clara? Because I see it too. You carry your mother's pain as if it were your own. You came here for truth. But what you seek is redemption, not mine but hers." She tried to look away, but his gaze held her still. "You think I don't see it?" he murmured. "The defiance, the walls you build, you wear your pride like armor. But I know what hides beneath it." "What then?" she whispered. He leaned closer, voice barely audible over the storm. "A heart that's never been allowed to want." The words broke something inside her. She stepped back, shaking her head. "You have no right." "Perhaps not," he said, voice low and raw. "But neither do you, and yet here we are." For a moment neither spoke. The rain softened, falling in a rhythmic whisper against the cliffs. Then Clara turned toward the sea, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "She smiled when she fell," she said. "You said so yourself." Perhaps she saw something you couldn't, that love doesn't end with death. It only changes hands. Alaric's breath caught. She turned back to him, the wind tangling her hair. "Maybe she knew you would meet me." The storm receded slowly, leaving behind a trembling quiet. He looked at her as though seeing her for the first time, not as a threat, not as a reminder of guilt, but as the first hint of forgiveness. When they returned to the carriage, neither spoke, but as the manor came back into view, Alaric's hand brushed hers. Tentative, uncertain, and unbearably human, Clara did not pull away. And though the road behind them was slick with rain, the silence that stretched between them no longer felt like punishment. It felt like the beginning of something neither could name. Chapter 5. The Price of Silence. The first whisper came 3 days later. It began in the marketplace, as whispers always did, carried between gloved hands and lowered gazes. By the time the rumor reached the steps of Hawthorne Manor, it had already mutated into a dozen forms. Some said Lord Hawthorne had been seen on the cliffs with a servant girl. Others claimed the girl was his mistress, and a few, with wicked delight, insisted that she was the ghost of Lady Eveline herself, returned to torment him in the shape of another. Inside the manor, silence had settled like frost. Clara could feel it everywhere, in the servants' hurried steps, in the way Mrs. Penrose, the housekeeper, avoided her eyes, in the tension that thickened the air whenever she entered a room. She had known from the moment she stepped foot on those cliffs that truth came with a price, but she had not known it would come so swiftly. That morning she found Alaric in the study. He sat by the fire, a half-finished letter before him, his expression hard. His hair was slightly disheveled, a rare human flaw that betrayed his restlessness. When she entered, he didn't look up. "You've heard," she said quietly. He nodded once. It was inevitable. "The servants are doing what servants always do when they sense blood in the water," he interrupted. "They whisper, they watch, they measure how close the fall of a man might bring them to power." Clara hesitated, then approached. "You could dismiss me, end it before it worsens." His gaze lifted then, sharp, incredulous. "You think that would silence them?" "It might save you," she said. "And what of you?" Her throat tightened. "I've survived worse." He rose then, his chair scraping the floor. "Clara, do you truly think I care what they say of me? I've lived half my life beneath the shadow of scandal. But you—" He stopped, his jaw tightening. "You shouldn't have to bear it. I'm not afraid," she said, though her heart pounded violently in her chest. "Then you're a fool," he snapped, and instantly regretted it. His voice softened. "Forgive me. It's not anger at you. It's everything. This house, this curse I seem to carry." She stepped closer, her voice steady. "Then let me share the weight of it." For a long moment he stared at her, torn between pride and yearning. Then quietly he said, "You don't know what you're asking." "I do," she whispered. "I'm asking you to trust me." Before he could respond, a sharp knock shattered the fragile stillness. The butler entered, his expression grave. "My lord," he said, bowing slightly. "You have a visitor." Alaric frowned. "At this hour?" "Yes, my lord, a Mr. Edmund Blake. He claims to be an associate of the late Lady Hawthorne's family." At the name, Alaric's face went still. Clara felt something cold coil in her chest. She had heard that name before, in town, whispered like a curse. Edmund Blake, cousin to Lady Eveline, a man of ambition and temper, a man who had once been denied the inheritance that passed to Alaric upon Eveline's death. "Show him in," Alaric said, his voice measured. Moments later, Edmund Blake entered, tall, impeccably dressed, with a smile that never reached his eyes. He bowed slightly, though the gesture carried more arrogance than respect. "Lord Hawthorne," he drawled, "it has been too long." "Not long enough," Alaric replied coldly. "What brings you to Dover?" Edmund's gaze slid past him, to Clara, who stood silently by the fire. His smile deepened. "Ah, and who is this charming creature?" "She is my companion," Alaric said sharply, "and you will speak to me, not to her." Edmund lifted an eyebrow. "Companion? How progressive of you, cousin. The town is quite enchanted by your generosity." Clara's cheeks burned, but before she could speak, Alaric's tone turned to steel. "Say what you came to say, Blake." Edmund's expression hardened. "Very well. I came because my aunt, Lady Eveline's mother, has petitioned the Crown to reopen the inquiry into Eveline's death." The words hit like a blow. Alaric's breath stilled. "That matter was settled years ago." "Perhaps," Edmund said smoothly, "but with these new rumors, it seems certain parties believe you may have had motive." "Motive?" Clara echoed, her voice trembling. "You cannot mean—" "I mean precisely that," Edmund said, his gaze shifting to her with chilling satisfaction. "It seems strange, does it not, that the poor Lord Hawthorne, haunted by guilt, now entertains a woman of similar beauty and form to his late wife?" Alaric stepped forward, fury blazing in his eyes. "Choose your next words carefully." Edmund smiled thinly. "You always did mistake anger for power, cousin. I came to offer a warning, or perhaps an opportunity. If you were to retire from Dover, relinquish your claim to certain estates, and live quietly elsewhere, I could ensure this matter remains forgotten. In other words, Alaric said, voice low, you came to blackmail me. Edmund's expression didn't waver. Such an ugly word. I prefer arrangement. The two men stared at each other, the silence between them taut as wire. Then Clara stepped forward. And if he refuses? Edmund looked at her, his smile turning predatory. Then I suppose we shall see what the law and the papers have to say about his companion. The word dripped with venom. Before Alaric could react, Clara's hand moved, sharp and swift, and struck Edmund across the face. The sound echoed in the room like a gunshot. Edmund's cheek flushed crimson, his eyes burning with disbelief and rage. You'll regret that, he hissed. No, Clara said, voice steady and cold. You will? Alaric moved between them. You will leave my house, he said, each word deliberate. Now, Edmund straightened his coat, his smile returning like a mask. As you wish, but remember, cousin, silence has a price, and I intend to collect it. He left without another word. When the door closed, Alaric turned toward Clara. You shouldn't have interfered, she glared at him. You're welcome. This isn't a game, Clara. He means to destroy me. And you. Then let him try, she said fiercely. I will not live in fear of his lies. He stared at her, and for a heartbeat, something like awe flickered in his eyes. You're braver than you should be, or perhaps I've simply less to lose, she murmured. He stepped closer, his voice softening. You have no idea how wrong you are. Their eyes met, the air between them thick with danger, defiance, and something deeper still. And though the fire burned low in the hearth, the room felt unbearably warm, as if the world outside had narrowed to this single, impossible moment. That night, Clara could not sleep. The storm that had passed days ago seemed to return, not in the sky, but within her. Every word Edmund had spoken gnawed at her mind. Every glance from Alaric, every unspoken truth burned through her chest. She rose from bed and went to the window. Beyond the glass, the sea was calm again, moonlight silvering its surface, but she could not shake the feeling that it was watching, waiting. Behind her, a quiet knock. She turned to see Alaric standing in the doorway, candlelight flickering over his face. I couldn't sleep, he said softly. Nor I, she admitted. He hesitated, then entered. There's something I should have told you about that day, about Eveline. Clara turned, her pulse quickening. Go on. He drew a slow breath. She wasn't the only one who died that day. A child, too, unborn. Clara froze. Your child? He nodded, pain shadowing his eyes. She never told me, not until that morning when she fell. She took more than her life. She took my chance at redemption. The confession left him trembling. Clara stepped closer, her eyes wet. Oh, Alaric, he closed his eyes. So when I offered you gold, when I begged for silence, it wasn't just to protect my name. It was to atone for a life I failed to save. Clara reached for his hand. You can't atone for the dead by denying the living. He looked at her then, truly looked, and something inside him seemed to ease. His voice broke as he whispered, And you, Clara, what would you have me do? Tell the truth, she said simply, and let them see who you are, not what they've made of you. He lowered his head, his forehead brushing hers. You make that sound so easy. It isn't, she whispered, but it's the only way to be free. Outside, the wind stirred again, soft, like the breath of something waking, and as the candle flickered between them, Alaric bent and kissed her hand, not with passion, but with reverence, the kind that binds a man's soul long before his heart dares follow. Chapter 6. Fire at Dawn. It began with smoke, at first faint, a thin, ghostly line that wound its way through the cracks beneath the door of the west wing. Then came the smell, sharp, acrid, unmistakable. By the time the alarm was raised, the fire had already taken hold. The servants ran through the corridors, shouting, dragging buckets and blankets. But the flames were hungry, too fast, too furious, and in the center of it all, as the inferno devoured years of history, Lord Alaric Hawthorne stood at the top of the grand staircase, his coat thrown over his arm, his face pale with realization. This was no accident. He had smelled the oil before the fire began. Hours earlier, the night had been eerily still. Clara had gone to the library to retrieve one of Alaric's old letters, something he'd written in grief after Eveline's death, something she meant to use to prove his innocence should Edmund make good on his threats. She had been sitting by candlelight, tracing the edge of his signature, when the door creaked open. "Still awake?" a voice drawled from the shadows. Her blood ran cold. "Mr. Blake," she said, rising slowly, "you've no right to be here." "Oh, but I do," Edmund said, stepping into the light. "You see, my dear, I tried kindness, I tried reason, but Hawthorne never was one for subtlety, nor, it seems, are his women." Clara's pulse quickened. "Leave, now!" He ignored her, eyes flicking to the open letter. "Ah, evidence, dangerous thing that, especially when it could undo a gentleman's entire fortune." She took a step back. "You wouldn't dare." "Oh, I would," he said, voice smooth as poison. "You see, my aunt believes Alaric killed Eveline. I don't. I think she simply realized what you haven't yet, that loving him is the surest way to ruin." Clara's hand trembled around the letter. "You're not here for justice." "No," he admitted, smiling thinly. "I'm here for gold or revenge, whichever burns brighter." And before she could scream, he struck the candle from her hand. The flame caught the drapes first, a spark, a rush of air, and then the room bloomed with fire. Clara stumbled back, coughing as smoke filled her lungs. She reached for the letter, but it was already gone, consumed by orange tongues that climbed the shelves. By the time she tore open the door and fled into the corridor, Edmund Blake had vanished. Now the fire had spread to the upper floors. The grand staircase glowed like a furnace. Portraits melted in their gilded frames. The marble bust of Eveline Hawthorne, serene and pale, cracked beneath the heat, and through it all Clara searched for Alaric. "Clara!" His voice came from somewhere beyond the smoke. "Clara, where are you?" "Here!" she cried, stumbling into the hall. The flames painted her skin gold and red. "The West Wing! Edmund! He did this." He reached her just as a beam crashed between them. Sparks rained around them, hissing like angry stars. "Go!" he shouted. "Take the servants. Use the garden exit. I'm not leaving you. Clara, please." He tried to reach her, but the fire roared between them, forcing him back. "I'll find another way out." She shook her head, tears streaking through soot. "You'll die. I already have once," he said grimly. "Now go." But she didn't. Instead, she turned and ran into the flames. "Clara!" His voice broke. She covered her mouth with her shawl and pressed forward, following the faint outline of his study. The room that had become his sanctuary, his prison. If the fire had started there, it might still hold proof of Edmund's crime, something that could clear Alaric forever. Through the smoke, She found the desk, half consumed, drawers burning at the edges. She tore one open, and there, beneath the charred papers, was a single folded letter, sealed in red wax, a confession. Her heart pounded. She clutched it to her chest. And then the ceiling above gave way. Hands caught her before she hit the ground. "Are you mad?" Alaric shouted, dragging her backward through the smoke. "You'll get yourself killed." "I found it," she gasped. "Eveline's letter. She wrote to you the night she died." He froze, eyes wide. "What?" But before he could read it, another crash. The staircase collapsing in a thunder of splintered wood. The only path left was through the east corridor, already half engulfed. "This way!" Clara cried. They ran, half stumbling, half dragging each other through heat that felt alive. The manor moaned as it burned, every wall a dying breath of memory. At the garden doors, the night air burst in, cold, clean, cruelly alive. Servants huddled on the lawn, shouting their names. Clara stumbled out first, coughing violently. Alaric followed, just as the roof behind them collapsed. For a long moment there was only silence. The manor burned like a beacon, its reflection shimmering in the dark sea below. And then Clara pressed the letter into his hands. "Read it," she whispered. He broke the seal with trembling fingers. The words inside were faint, scorched at the edges, but still legible. Eveline's handwriting, beautiful, sharp, unmistakable. "Alaric, I know now that I have done what cannot be undone. I have taken your love and made it into a weapon because I feared it. The child I carry is not yours, and yet I cannot bear to live with what I've done. When you read this, I will be gone, and perhaps then you will finally be free. Do not let guilt chain you to my shadow. You deserve to love again. E. The letter slipped from his fingers. He stared into the flames, the truth tearing through him more savagely than the fire itself. "All this time, I thought..." Clara touched his arm. "She wasn't your sin, Alaric. She was your wound." He turned to her then, the light of the burning manor reflected in his eyes. "And you?" She smiled faintly, eyes wet with ash and tears. "Maybe I was meant to be your cure." He caught her face in his hands, his thumb brushing the soot from her cheek. For a moment, the world fell away. The fire, the ruin, the screams. There was only her, fierce, trembling, alive. "Clara Whitmore," he whispered, "you've given me back my life." "And you," she said softly, "have finally stopped running from it." The first rays of dawn broke across the horizon then, pale gold against the smoke. The manor, Hawthorne's legacy of grief, collapsed inward with a roar that sounded almost like release. Alaric drew Clara into his arms, holding her as the wind carried the embers skyward, tiny sparks that rose and vanished like souls set free. By the time the fire burned out, all that remained of Hawthorne Manor was stone and memory. But as the sun rose, so did something else. A future neither had dared to imagine. They had lost everything: fortune, title, reputation, and yet, for the first time, Alaric felt unburdened, and Clara, her hands blistered, her heart full, realized that love born in ruin was the kind that never truly died. Chapter 7. The gold he could not buy. The ruins of Hawthorne Manor still smoked at dawn. By mid-morning, the fire had been reduced to a sigh, thin ribbons of grey that curled against the pale October sky. What had once been a fortress of wealth and secrets now lay in ashes, its grand halls swallowed by silence. Clara stood among the remnants, her skirts streaked with soot, her hands raw from the night's battle. The air still smelled of salt and ruin, but beneath it, faint and fragile, came the scent of something else. Rain on earth, life after fire. From the hilltop she could see the sea. It shimmered with cruel beauty, reflecting the morning light like scattered coins. She thought of all the gold she had once dreamed of, the kind that could feed a life, pay a debt, silence the world's scorn, and she smiled, just barely, because she no longer wanted it. Behind her, footsteps crunched over blackened stone. "Clara!" came Alaric's voice, hoarse, soft, uncertain. She turned. He stood among the ruins in his shirt sleeves, his face smudged with ash, his hair unbound. There was no trace of the nobleman now. No arrogance, no mask. Only a man stripped bare by truth and fire. In his hand, he held a small leather pouch, one of the few things rescued from the wreckage. He approached her slowly, the pouch trembling slightly between his fingers. "I found this," he said quietly. "It survived somehow." When he untied the string, gold coins spilled into his palm, melted, warped, blackened at the edges, but unmistakably gold. "The same coins I offered you that night," he murmured. "The night I begged for your silence." Clara said nothing. He looked down at them, eyes distant. "It seems fitting, doesn't it? Even fire couldn't destroy them, only change their shape." He extended his hand toward her. "Take them, what little I have left." She looked at the coins, dull, lifeless things, and then at him. "What would I buy with them, Alaric?" "Freedom," he said. "Safety, a life far from this cursed name." She stepped closer, her voice soft but unyielding. "You still think love is a debt to be paid?" He met her eyes, pained. "It's all I've ever known how to offer." "Then learn something else," she whispered. She reached out and closed his hand around the coins. "You can't buy back what you lost, but you can build something new, not with gold, but with the truth." He swallowed hard. "And if I don't know how, then start by asking," she said gently. "Not for forgiveness, for love." The words seemed to catch him off guard, as if they were a language he'd long forgotten how to speak. His eyes glistened and he bowed his head. "Clara," he said, his voice breaking, "I have nothing left to give." "You have yourself," she said. "That's all I ever wanted." For a moment, he simply stared at her. This woman who had defied him, challenged him, saved him. And then slowly he sank to one knee, not in grand gesture, but quiet surrender. "I offered you gold for silence," he said, voice trembling, "and you gave me love for nothing. If you will have me, not as Lord Hawthorne, not as a man of title or guilt, but simply as Alaric, then I will spend whatever years remain learning what that means." Clara knelt beside him, her hand finding his. "Then learn beside me," she said softly, "for neither of us is what we were." He smiled faintly, eyes wet. "No, we're what remains after the fire." Spring had returned to Dover, where the manor once stood. A garden now grew, wild at first, then deliberate. Roses and ivy climbing the broken walls, lavender and thyme spilling over stones. At the center stood a small cottage, modest, whitewashed, open to the sea breeze. Inside, the air smelled of ink, salt, and bread. Clara sat by the window, her hands dusted with flour, her face lit by the morning sun. She was writing, a letter perhaps, or a story. Alaric entered quietly, carrying a basket of fresh herbs. His sleeves were rolled, his hair untamed, his smile unguarded. The shadows that had haunted his face for years had softened, not vanished, but no longer cruel. "You're up early," he said. She looked up, smiling. "Habit." He placed the basket down, brushing his hands. "Mrs. Penrose sent word. The villagers are nearly done with the schoolhouse." "The one you funded?" she teased. He grimaced playfully. "Funded is a generous word. Promised is more accurate." She rose, crossing to him. "Then we'd better make good on it. A lord without gold and a lady without title. Imagine the scandal." He laughed, the sound rich and unburdened. "You do realize, Clara Whitmore, that by marrying me you've condemned yourself to a life of endless gossip and mediocre tea." She smiled, rising on her toes to kiss him. "Then let them talk." Later that day, as they walked through the half-built village schoolhouse, a group of children ran past them, barefoot and laughing. One little girl stopped and stared up at Alaric, her eyes wide. "Is it true," she asked shyly, "that you used to live in a castle?" He smiled. "Once." "And where is it now?" He looked at Clara, then back at the child. "Gone. But something better stands in its place." The girl tilted her head. "What's that?" "Hope," he said simply. The girl grinned and ran off. Clara took his hand as they watched her go. The wind carried the scent of the sea, the sound of gulls, the hum of life. Small, imperfect, but real. Alaric turned to her, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. "Do you ever miss it? The manner, the finery, the world we burned?" She thought for a moment, then shook her head. "No, because I never truly lived until it was gone." He smiled, quiet and full. "You make it sound as though ruin was a blessing." "Maybe it was," she said. "The fire took what we didn't need. Pride, fear, pretense, and left us with what we couldn't buy." He looked at her, his eyes full of the man he had become, not the haunted nobleman, but the human beneath. "The gold I could not buy," he murmured. Clara smiled softly. "Love." He kissed her then, not as apology, not as desperation, but as promise. The sea roared in the distance, the sun broke through the clouds, and the ruins of Hawthorne Manor bloomed quietly around them, turning blackened stone into green. And for the first time, Alaric Hawthorne did not feel cursed. He felt free. Years later, travelers passing through Dover would sometimes stop by the cliffs and ask about the ruins by the sea, the place where a great house had burned and a legend had risen. Some said it was tragedy, others whispered it was penance, but the villagers would only smile and point toward the little white cottage beyond the lavender fields. "That's where the Lord lives," they'd say, "and his lady, the one he offered gold for silence, and who made him beg for her love." And if you lingered there at dusk, when the sun bled into the sea, you might hear laughter, soft, human, and unafraid, not the sound of ghosts, but of two souls who had finally learned that love, once earned, is the only treasure fire cannot take. Optional epilogue: the silence that spoke. The countryside had changed little, though the years had softened its edges. The same mist still drifted through the meadows, pale and slow, like breath upon glass. The same church bell still tolled at dawn, distant and tender, carrying across the valley like a memory unwilling to fade. Yet within that stillness, something new had taken root. Something quiet and alive. The old Ashbourne estate no longer stood as it once did. The fire had taken much. The grand hall, the ballroom, the carved stairway that had once echoed with footsteps and music. What remained was smaller, humbler, a rebuilt house of stone and wood, wreathed in ivy and wild flowers. But to the woman who stood in the garden that morning, it was more beautiful than any palace. Evelyn's hands, once soft and unmarked, bore the faint traces of a life remade. Tiny scars, calluses earned from tending the earth, from rebuilding what the flames had taken. Her gown was plain now, her hair tied loosely at her nape, and yet she carried herself with a grace no title could grant. A horse's hoofbeats approached on the gravel path behind her. She didn't turn immediately. She knew the sound too well. Still up before dawn, came a voice behind her, warm and teasing. She smiled, the corners of her lips curving slowly. Habit. The mornings used to be the only time I could think. Lord Lucian Ashbourne, no longer lord, for he had sold much of his land and title to pay debts, both monetary and moral, dismounted and walked toward her. He wore no finery, no signet ring, no mark of wealth, save for the steady calm in his eyes. "You still think too much," he said softly, brushing the edge of her sleeve. "You used to say silence frightened you." It did. Her gaze drifted toward the horizon, where dawn painted the fields gold. "Because it reminded me of all I wasn't allowed to say. But now," she inhaled deeply, letting the cool air fill her lungs. "Now it reminds me that peace doesn't need to shout to be heard." Lucien looked at her for a long moment. This woman who had once been a secret, a scandal, a price to be paid. Now she was his truth. He reached into his coat pocket and withdrew a small pouch. The faint clink of coins stirred the air between them. Evelyn arched a brow. "You're not serious?" He smiled faintly. "Old habits die hard. I thought I'd offer you gold again. One last time?" She crossed her arms, amused but wary. "For what this time?" "For your forgiveness," he said simply. Evelyn's expression softened. She took the pouch, weighed it in her hand for a moment, then loosened the drawstring. The gold gleamed in the early light, symbols of a past long buried. Then, without a word, she tilted her hand and let the coins fall, one by one, into the soil at her feet. The metallic chime echoed softly, fading into the earth. Lucien watched, saying nothing. When the last coin was gone, she looked up at him. "You already have it," she said quietly. "You earned it the day you stopped trying to buy it." He stepped closer, his hand finding hers. The years had taken their toll on both of them, but when their fingers entwined, it was as if the world stilled again. Two lives that had burned, broken, and rebuilt together. In the distance, a child's laughter drifted through the morning. Their son, chasing a dog across the dew-laden field. Evelyn smiled at the sound, a lightness in her chest she had never known in her youth. Lucien's gaze followed hers. "He'll never know what we lost." "No," she said softly, "but he'll grow up knowing what we found." The bell tolled again, slower now, fading into the rhythm of birdsong. The sun lifted higher, gilding the land that had once been a place of secrets and shame. Lucien bent his head and kissed her forehead. No grand gesture, no audience, no bargain, just the quiet truth of love that had survived its own fire. And in that silence, the same silence that once held guilt, fear, and longing, there was peace, the kind that needed no words, the kind that spoke louder than any vow ever could.